All right, so welcome back everybody. I almost didn't record this, but I got to thinking there very well may be some interest on how to change out a gas cooktop. Now this should apply whether your gas cooktop is outside in an outdoor kitchen like ours or inside your home. We're gonna go over some basics for changing these out as well as some safety tips. Plus, I figured there might be some interest in this because our outdoor kitchen build series was huge. And one regret that I have had with our outdoor kitchen is this 5-burner cooktop I put in. It's been working perfect, but the center burner is not powerful enough to compete with any wind, any fans, or to do any sort of frying or large wok cooking. So here's a look at the burner. This should be exactly how it is in your kitchen countertop inside your home. So all rules should apply here. I do want to say real quick, if you are uncomfortable with anything, you're dealing with gas here, and I think it goes without saying that's explosive and dangerous. You need to hire a licensed plumber that is certified to work with the gas in order to take care of your needs. Being that I plumbed all this out here and had to pass code, I feel very comfortable with it, and you may want to tackle it yourself. But again, if you're not comfortable, hire someone who is. So first and foremost, we need to kill gas going to our appliance. Now underneath your kitchen counter, there may be a cutoff valve. Mine happens to be over here. This is the gas line coming out of our house. You may have a cutoff valve underneath or behind your stove that looks just like this. So we're gonna kill our gas. When a valve is straight up and in line with a pipe, that means gas can flow through. When it's off horizontal to it like that, that means the fuel has been cut off. I'm gonna go ahead and cut off all the lines to my other appliances out here as well. Now I'm dealing with propane. You may be dealing with liquid natural gas or LNG, and your supply to your home might be completely different. So should you not have a cutoff valve underneath, it might be outside of your home if you're being supplied by a city or some other source. Now if you're running propane like me and you don't have a cutoff valve at the house, there is always a cutoff valve at the tank. Of course, you're gonna wanna look underneath, make sure there's no wasp. A lot of times there is. You can see that we have a cutoff valve right here. You can cut off the flow going to the regulator and to the line to the house. Now again, if you have city service, something like that, you may have to call somebody in, but there should always be a cutoff valve going into the house. You may have a cutoff valve underground. It's gonna vary. That's for you to figure out. But if the stove's installed properly, there should be a cutoff valve behind or underneath the stove. So now we need to remove the stove. Typically, they're put in two ways. Mine is just siliconed in, all underneath around the edge, so I'm going to have to gently pry that up without cracking my tile. Or some stoves are installed in with clamps, so you need to get underneath your cabinet, look underneath the stove. This is just like a kitchen sink's installed. There's a clamp, because there's a cutout right here you're about to see. A clamp can go underneath, clamp to, and actually bolt to the stove. Typically they'll be on the sides, maybe a couple in the front. But you should be able to look underneath around the perimeter of the stove and see those, and you may have to unscrew them, drop the clamps out, and then you can pop out your stove. But before we do that, I know it's so dark in here, we're gonna have to disconnect our gas line right here. It should be a pressure fitting, and this stove plugs in. That'll be easier to see once I remove it. All right, so I was able to get underneath with a crowbar on the bottom side, get against wood and pry against the stove. You do not want to pry against tile because you can crack it, although I did use this just to gently lift it up and get my fingers underneath. But now that we have this stove loose, you can see the cutout there. This is the gas line that we're about to disconnect right there at that fitting. And you can see this plugs into an outlet, which is over here. So we're going to unplug the stove. That is it, very straightforward. So now I'm going to want to clear off all of this silicone. That's going to take a little bit to get it scraped back so we have a nice even seal for the new stove. And the new stove might actually be a little larger than this opening here, so I may have to go get my tile saw and trim some of this out. But now that I have all the silicone cleaned up, I tried to fit the new cooktop in, and it's too wide, which I already knew that going into this, but I wanted this because it's got the most powerful center burner I could find. So I'm going to take about a 1/4 inch off of the tile, this Durarock down here, which is tile backer board, and probably some of the wood. So this is going to be interesting making all that happen. I have a specialty blade on here that's made just for cutting porcelain tile, ceramic tile, granite, things such as that. So I know I already have the right blade cut through these first couple layers, and then I may have to come back in underneath and trim out with a jigsaw. Now, depending on your type of countertop, hopefully you get a cooktop that fits just fine. But should you have to trim it out, you're going to have to make for sure that you get tools designed for whatever the surface is. All right, so let's have a discussion about the burners and the nozzles and the pressure regulator that come with gas stoves. In my experience, all gas stovetops and gas stoves are typically set up for natural gas usage. So if you're going to use propane, you have to change all of these little brass nozzles out, as well as often you have to make adjustments in the regulator itself. Now, most stoves come with a conversion kit. You may have to order that, but all of them that I order, I make for sure has this. You can see we're going to go out to smaller orifices where all these burners are, and they're labeled. They have different sizes, so make sure you don't mix these up. Per the instructions, we're also going to have to unscrew this cap right here and make some adjustments on the pressure side of the regulator, because natural gas and propane run completely differently. So I've already found the size wrench that I need. It's a 7mm for these particular nozzles, and we're going to change them out one at a time. That way we make for sure we're putting the right ones in the right location, because all these burners are set to burn at a different BTU or a different output. So that's what the orifice looks like. You're going to notice again the propane is a much smaller hole. You won't burn right if you don't do this. So again, we're labeled for center burner. Let's go ahead and just change that one out. According to the instructions, we're going to loosen this cap up top. Your stove may be different, and there's like a little, we're just going to call it a plunger right there. So we're actually going to have to loosen, and it's labeled, going to be so hard to see, liquid propane one way, natural gas the other. So we need to unscrew this, flip it around, and screw it back in. Alright, so you see we're going out. Flip it around, screw it in. All right, now the arrow is pointing up for propane. Reinstall this. Another very important thing, use proper seal or thread compound that's made for gas. You can't just use your typical thread compound tape, because it is not made for gas. It's usually for like watertight plumbing fixtures. Now one side's going to screw to the stove. That's the upper arrow side. The input side is going to be whatever hose fitting you have, which is most likely compression fitting. I had to buy mine for the last stove, so we're going to go remove it from the other stove, thread it into here. All right, so here's the fitting that fits the regulator, and then it's got the compression fitting on the end. Anytime you see a compression fitting like this with the kind of concaved end, those do not need sealant. So we're going to put the sealant on the non-concave end, which is not a pressured end. All right, don't forget, arrow coming in and through. So this is going to be our supply side, which is where I'm hooking the hose up. So let's thread this in. All right, now on the bottom side of the stove right here is our threaded gas insert. So we're going to do the same thing. Put some seal tape all around this. Now that we're done setting up our regulator, we're going to thread it on. And then here is the plug that has to plug into the wall for ignition, or you could light this with a lighter. So we're going to undo this, put a bead of silicone around the hole, so water can't escape underneath this and down into it when it rains out here. And we're ready to reconnect the gas line, which is very simple to do. Plug this into the outlet so we get ignition, and then we can move on with installing this. Now here's some of those brackets that I was telling you about. I'm not going to use these because I'm siliconing this in, but these can actually be used underneath side, probably in this direction and this direction right here, to clamp to the counter cutout opening. Those clamps could essentially go underneath the wood here, although the way I've got mine framed out, this is not traditional. I can't really use those, so a good bead of silicone around this. It was very difficult to get the last one out. I mean, it was in there really good. All right, let's get this drop down in there. All right, now I'm going to get underneath, plug in the stovetop, and connect that gas line, and then we can move up to setting up the top. All right, so it's very difficult for me to record underneath, but very straightforward. Screwed the gas line right on, compression fit, and snug it up. But here is an important point that I want y'all to know. You need to turn your gas on, and you need to check for leaks. Keep in mind, if you had a leak, especially in a cabinet area where all these are going to be mounted, you've got gases building up in there, and that could potentially cause an explosion. You should be worried about that. But have no fear, there's two ways you can check for a leak. One, you can take a spray bottle, put a little bit of Dawn dish soap in it, a little bit of water, and spray it on there. You want soapy water. So spray it right on where you put the fittings. Once you pressurize this with gas, if you start seeing any bubbles blowing out, you have a leak. You need to take this apart, reseal everything, or at least reseal where the leak is. All right, so here's my gas leak detector, and you can get these on Amazon real cheap. This one's from Top Test. I actually run their moisture meters for my firewood, several different types of their meters. So for example, y'all remember the connection that we hooked up on the back side here? Put pressure to it, put gas to it, let it purge the air for a minute, and then you would use a meter like this to go around, but because it's so dark in there, it's hard to show. Let me show you the way it would work up here. But if I barely press down right before it ignites, this thing picks up the gas instantly. See that? I was able to push down just a little and not kick on the igniter. So this senses the propane gas and lets you know you have a leak. So that fitting on underneath side, you just work this around it and see if you pick up anything. And if this alarms and goes off, you know you got a problem. See, I'm pressing down on it again, getting some gas to come out. That should clear out here in a second. See, up here, no gas. Down here, press it one more time. Now you know you got a leak. All right, here we are, everything installed. Gas leak check done, no leaks found. So we can turn this on. We're gonna turn it to high for a second to purge the air out of the system since we just connected everything, and then press down to ignite. And there it is. All right, so it's gonna burn a little funny for just a minute while it purges air out the system since we did some disconnecting. Plus it's very windy out here today. All right, I can already tell y'all that is a much bigger flame, which is gonna be about impossible to see on camera, but much bigger flame than our last stove would give us. All right, y'all, hopefully you learned something. You can change out a stovetop should you have one of these. By the way, this is very similar to doing a standard oven and stovetop, except you'll have one nozzle that you'll have to change out in the very back bottom. That's where you hook up your gas line too, by the way, and then the instructions will come with a little nozzle to change out there should you be doing natural gas to propane. Now if you're running on natural gas, again, every stove I've ever bought is already set up that way. I'm not saying some don't come set up for propane, but they're typically natural gas set up. So if you're not going to propane, you don't even have to do some of the conversion steps that you've seen today. All right, I'll put a link down in the description to the gas detector, and hopefully you enjoyed this, learned something. Catch you on the next one.